And Brandon, we are going to move on into the top two from last year in the Big Ten West, and we're going to get into the Iowa Hawkeyes. And for this one, I believe you have something. Usually I'm kicking a point off to you to start, but I believe you said before we started recording this segment that you actually have a question for me to start out this segment.
I do.
So I'm going to kick it to you to ask me a question, which I'm excited because usually it never happens because I'm the host. I usually ask the questions.
You do, but I'm mixing it up. I'm shaking things up.
Stirring the pot a little bit, getting those ingredients going for this preview. I like it.
So the question that I have to you is, can the Iowa Hawkeyes get back to 2015, get back to that 2015 form? They were dominant. They had Lady Luck on their side. Everything went Iowa's way. Can they get back to the 2015 form? And how do they do it?
Well, last time you asked me a question on this podcast, I answered the second one first. It was the Illinois one. I answered the second question first and then the first one. This one I'm going to go in order. I'll answer your first question first. No, I don't think that Iowa is going to get back to form. And the reason why, and this is the big reason why I am so uncertain about Iowa this season, is quarterback. Last year, they had starting quarterback C.J. Beathard, who for me, I was confident in him being the starting quarterback. Now, I know last season, compared to the year before, was not anywhere near as what they wanted to. Yeah, I know you beat Michigan, but 5 losses when you lose to Penn State, Wisconsin, Northwestern, and that North Dakota State loss, which was huge. It was nowhere near 2015 where you were undefeated for most of it until you lost to Michigan State, and we had the whole fake ID conversation after Colin Cowherd said it on his radio program. C.J. Beathard, the loss of Beathard is the big reason why I'm unsure about Iowa, and it's because Beathard in 2015 had an amazing season. Well, amazing yardage-wise. Almost 3,000 yards, 17 touchdowns. Didn't turn the ball over, though. Only had 5 touchdowns. Of course,
5 interceptions.
5 interceptions. Of course, they had a big-time running back that year in Jordan Kanziri, who I still remember that season torching my Illinois Fighting Illini to the point where I almost had to go to the hospital because I didn't take enough blood pressure medication to watch that game. I basically had to up my dosage.
And you're being serious
just
about that.
For that game. It felt like the point where, and I'm using this as a reference, from the 30 for 34 days in October, I want to say it was Bill Simmons who said it, or when it was in that segment where he goes, yeah, my dad pulled out a box which looked like a box of Altoids. And I went, oh, can I have one? He goes, oh, no, these are heart pills. Basically, when he was watching the Yankees and the Red Sox. That's how I felt watching this game with how Jordan Kanziri was running on my team. They lost him last season, so that was a huge reason why they weren't as good as they were last year. Yeah, that you're like, well, Ricky, they still don't have him. However, yes, they did have 2 1,000-yard rushers last season. But C.J. Beathard, just under 2,000 last year, double the interceptions last year in around the same amount of touchdowns. He had 17. And really, to me, I wonder if with the loss of Beathard, can Nathan Stanley, who is going to be coming back, or Tyler Wiegers, one of them, or is it going to be Ken O'Keefe? Which one of these guys, new quarterback and O'Keefe, or Nathan and Tyler, which one is going to be the guy that Iowa, A, goes with, and B, which one is going to be the one that really brings them back to form? I'm not as confident in any of these guys, though, and that is the big question mark I have about this Iowa team, is how do you replace C.J. Beathard?
Yeah. Tyler Wiegers has played in 3 games. He has 32 passing yards. Nathan Stanley, is he a transfer from Ole Miss?
He played last year.
Not from Ole Miss?
No, he played last year for Iowa.
Oh.
He was a freshman for Iowa last year.
Then I must be thinking of another guy.
No, Nathan Stanley was out of a recruit out of Wisconsin. He had 9 attempts last year for 62 yards, no touchdowns, no INTs.
So Tyler Wiegers or Stanley, either one of them, who I think would be probably the more
Well, because you think that
I don't even want to say a consistent guy, but the guy you go with because
They're
at least
older.
he's been able to see the field. Either one of those, they're not going to be C.J. Beathard. They're not going to be C.J. Beathard even right away. You know, and that's the part that's going to hurt you. You have Matt Vandenberg back at wide receiver that could give the team a jolt if he's able to stay healthy. And then you have Akram Wadley, who could be a very good running back if the team feeds him the football. I mean, I could see this guy being able to get 20-plus carries a game, and he should be consistently getting that football and pretty solid. But the quarterback position on this Iowa team is very much up in the air. It's very much up in the air.
Well, and also you take that, and I look at that and go, okay, that's a question. Then you look at receiver, and that's another position that is kind of linked. It's linked with the quarterback. The quarterback throws to the receiver, but that is also a position that has big concern for this Iowa team. As I look at the big one is Matt Vandenberg, who missed all of spring practice after re-injuring the same foot that caused him to miss the last 9 games of last season. That's a guy where if I'm an Iowa fan, I'm sitting there going, well, great. We don't have a guy at quarterback after spring practices that is definitely our guy, and I'm not confident that any of those guys could really be the one to win a Big Ten West with. And now we've got receiver where Vandenberg is now re-injured that same injury that he had last year, and the team's second most experienced receiver is junior Jamarick Smith, and he was suspended from spring practice because of academic shortcomings and actually left the team in early May. So he's gone. You have Vandenberg that's injured, and you have questions at quarterback. That is not a recipe you want for a team that was in a college football playoff talk 2 years ago and was second in the Big Ten West last year.
It's not great. It is not great, and
you're really behind the 8 ball in my mind.
Well, you really are. But the problem is that it's not just the fact that you're having, trying to struggle to fill some holes. I know we're just talking offensively. Defensively,
yeah.
I think that this team could be pretty solid again. But I think that on the offensive side, everything that you mentioned is everything that I would agree with. Everything that you mentioned is everything that I would second. The only spot that you have that you know that you can probably be pretty consistent with it is the running back position. The passing game last year, 6.4 yards per pass. It's not very good. And that was with C.J. Beathard, though. You need to get better than that.
Like I said, although if C.J. Beathard was back for another year, I'd be confident. He did have a down season last year compared to the 2015 campaign. He did throw twice as more interceptions and finally got to double-digit interceptions last year.
But kind of where I was going with all that before I kind of went off a little bit. The teams that are up there, Wisconsin, Nebraska.
Or Nebraska.
I would even throw in Minnesota or Northwestern. They're not necessarily having those problems offensively. They pretty much have set their guys that they're going to go with for the most part.
Except for maybe I think Minnesota was the only other one we had where we had a quarterback where it's like which quarterback is going to take over, and it's two very inexperienced quarterbacks.
But the reason why I put in Minnesota is because they have two very experienced running backs who are both very, very good, who can lead that team. Can
carry the load for the inexperienced quarterback.
Exactly, and I'm not saying that Wadley can't do that, but it's not just the quarterback position, it's wide receiver. It's wide receiver. That re-injury to Matt Vandenberg, that could be so costly for the Iowa Hawkeyes, and they could find themselves not at the top, but at the middle of this division in the Big Ten.
And the one thing I kind of don't want it to seem like we're shitting all over the Iowa Hawkeyes offensively. The one good thing about this offense heading into this year, and they could kind of lean on, is that up front, 5 starters returning. They return all 5 starters on the offensive line unit. 4 starters. And this is a team that also, with those, won the Joe Moore Award last year for the nation's top offensive line last season. So you have the majority of those guys coming back. That is something that you can definitely lean on. Maybe them and Wadley can be the thing to have them lean on, and while the passing is kind of, let's see if we can get something going, if one of these quarterbacks can step up. Because I look at their schedule, and for most of the teams, if you've listened throughout the entire podcast, either on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, you have heard me to this point say in several of them, the Northwestern one, the Minnesota one, the Nebraska one, of I don't know about Iowa. I don't know about Iowa. The Iowa one could be a loss, but I just don't know about Iowa. We'll get to them later. Well, we are here, and we're talking about Iowa now. And I look at every single team we have talked to when it comes to Northwestern, Minnesota, and Nebraska, and then Wisconsin, who we will talk about next. There's a big possibility in my mind that Iowa could lose all 4 of those games this season. And I know that the thing that I mentioned, and you might say, well, Ricky, I listened to the Nebraska one, and you said that that one's a 50-50, and that, well, yeah, the only reason that's a 50-50 is it's the last game that Iowa plays, and I would hope by that time they have something going maybe, and then that could do well. Maybe the Wisconsin-Nebraska game fall into that, but Northwestern and Minnesota are a little bit earlier. Plus, they play their first 2 games on the conference schedule at home against Penn State. I'm sorry, that's a loss. And then on the road in East Lansing, that could be a loss as well, because we talked about last week, Michigan State could be a much more improved team this year. I look at this and you go, those could be 2 losses. Northwestern and Minnesota could be 2 losses. Nebraska and Wisconsin could be 2 more. What's 2 times 3? That's 6 losses. This could be a 6-6 team this year. This could be a team that is 6-6, maybe even 5-7, because I didn't even mention that they go to Ames this year to play the Cyclones, and usually Iowa State plays them pretty tough because that's a big rivalry game. So this year, I don't have the best outlook for the Iowa Hawkeyes.
So we've talked in great detail, for the most part, the offense for Iowa. Let's move it over to the defense here for a minute. Okay. That was a pretty solid unit last year. And they return probably their leader, the big guy for them, Josie Jewell.
Along with 2 other linebackers. They're turning 3 starters at linebacker.
And Josie Jewell at linebacker for sure is going to be huge because he's led the team in tackles the last 2 seasons, and he was one of the biggest forces and biggest factors in the win against Michigan last year that Iowa won it at the end of the game, and that was such a huge win for Iowa. But then Bo Bauer, Ben Neiman on the outside return as well. They're going to be huge, and it's going to make for a pretty good linebacking core, and I think that Iowa is going to be able to hang their hat on that. However, in the secondary, you look at what happened with Brandon Snyder going down with an ACL injury and them losing him. And that happened in the spring. But then you have Miles Taylor and Jake Gervasi, who are going to have to be the guys that step up in the secondary and get the job done. That's kind of what it is. It's the next man up. The defensive front 7, they need to be able to get pressure at the line. And for me, just going through what I just mentioned and looking at this defense, it looks like a defense that's going to be able to be solid yet again this year. So will they be able to pick up an Iowa offense that is in transition and is still trying to figure themselves out?
There's one question I have about the defense. The good thing is, like we said, you've got Joel coming back. You returned 3 starters at linebacker from last season. The big question for me, you have to replace 3 starters in the secondary, one of which being a guy who is now in the NFL, was the 2015 Thorpe Award winner, in Desmond King. This was a guy coming off of 2015, Brandon. I loved him, mainly because of one reason. Guy was an Iowa ball hawk. Not a Hawkeye. He was a ball hawk for Iowa in that 2015 season. 8 interceptions, 8 of his 14 career interceptions coming in that junior campaign. Now, he also, like the entire team, it seemed, took a step back last year, and he only had 3 like he did the year before for Iowa in 2016 in his senior campaign. But you are losing him. You're losing him. That's basically a 58 to 70 tackle guy in the secondary, a 3 to 8 interception guy in the secondary, along with 2 other spots. I look at what we've talked about. And I go back to the schedule. If Wisconsin has their quarterback going, if Nebraska has their quarterback going by that time, if Minnesota has a high-flying offense by that point, we already talked about Thorson for Northwestern, and even what's worse, early on, you've got 2 quarterbacks with Michigan State and Swarley, who we know they are going to be teams, Penn State and Michigan State, Swarley being with Penn State, that is. They're going to have their quarterbacks all situated. So early on, you're playing 2 teams that already have their quarterbacks situated. Maybe you don't have that secondary spot figured out. Could get torched in those 2 games. The middle games, hopefully you have your secondary more intact, because if you don't, Northwestern and Minnesota might be able to make you pay, and then by the time you get to Wisconsin and Nebraska, it's a lost season. So I'm coming back to those 6 games because it is key, and that is a spot I look at as a glaring spot for the defense. If they want success this year, they have to shore up the secondary.
So for Iowa, what I put down as a successful season would be a 9-win season. I know that when you look at their schedule, 9 wins is tough to find on their schedule. But a 9-win season for Iowa would be a successful one. It'd be a win better than what they were last year. And it would mean that they stayed competitive and they were consistent throughout the year.
I just don't see it.
It is going to be tough, especially when you start off. Let's give them 3 wins to start the season.
I'll give them 2. That Iowa State game, I am not sure, only because of how close those 2 have played in the past.
Okay, so let's give them 3 wins to start the season, like I said.
Plus, Iowa usually blows a non-conference game.
And then Penn State, that's going to be a loss, I would say. Michigan State, like you said earlier, improved team. Illinois, I'd give them a win. Northwestern, I cannot say for sure. Minnesota, same thing. Ohio State, I'll give them a loss. Wisconsin, probably a loss. Purdue, a win. And Nebraska, throw it up there. So right there, you got about 5. You've got about 5 wins for them. Probably 3 or 4 losses. And then the rest of them are question marks. So I'm very much with you in the sense that Iowa may not be even returning to an 8-5 season this next year. But they could come out and surprise. But injuries already have hurt that offense. That offense, and I don't want to say that. Oh well, they don't have Matt Vandenberg, they're going to be screwed. That's not true. And they do have 4 starters returning on the offensive line, which will open up a lot of running room for Akram Wadley. But still, at the quarterback situation, there is nothing clear. There's nothing clear cut. There's nothing set. And that's where it's always not off-putting. That's not the right word. But it's always a little, can you really say for certain that then this team is going to be uber competitive this season?
And the reason why, and I want this because I know Iowa fans have probably already started to roast me in the comment section. Yeah, I know the past 2 years you have beaten Iowa State handily, but remember 3 years ago they beat you 20-17, and this hasn't been a series that has always been dominated by Iowa since 2010. Iowa State has had some stabs at you guys, but the reason why I'm not ready to give them a just up 3-0 to start the season is because this Iowa team, no matter who they have had, since 2010, Brandon, since 2010, they have only swept non-conference one time, and that was 2015. That was the miraculous fake bar ticket or fake ID. That's what I was looking for. That was the infamous fake ID season, the only time they have swept the non-conference. And I mean, just look back to a year ago, they lost to North Dakota State. Yeah, I know it was like a last-second field goal, but you still lost to North Dakota State. So based on this team's track record and based on the questions that we have already said, who knows? We haven't even mentioned they play a quarterback in week 1 in Allen, Josh Allen, who could torch him week 1. He could torch him, and that could be the upset game that they lose. I'm just not ready to give them 3-0 based on their track record of having an upset in their non-conference. But the thing you said is right. Penn State's tough. Michigan State is tough. And I look at the teams that I mentioned. You say 9 wins is that's a good season for them?
That would be a successful season for them. At least that's how I would look at it.
I look at the schedule, though, and I see at least 4 losses. That means you're not getting 9 wins. And the ones I see, Penn State and Michigan State, there's 1, 2. Northwestern on the road. Wisconsin on the road. There's 4 losses for you right there. That's not a 9-win season. So
no, it could be a 9-win season.
With a bowl game. I'm saying before the bowl game. Before the bowl game, that's 8 wins. That means if you lose one of those other ones to Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa State, I'll even throw Wyoming because I even think they're playing one of the top quarterback prospects in this draft to start the season. And usually those losses that they've had have come on their home field, if I'm not mistaken. But this Iowa team has a ton of questions, especially offensively, and I feel like they're going to have to answer them quick because even if they go 3-0 in the non-conference, they are going to have those questions have to be answered quickly because your first game is against Penn State. And Penn State, we talked about them last week. They're a team that we are not only talking about Big Ten championship, we are talking about national championship and about college football playoff for this team. So I'm gonna ask you. I see this team as a potential. I'm gonna say right now 4 to 6 losses on my slate, and they all come down to conference games in Penn State, Michigan State, Northwestern, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. Any final thoughts for the Hawkeyes before we move on to Bucky's Badgers?
Nope.
This is where we turn it on to you guys, though. Let us know down below in the comment section, what do you think about the quarterback situation and the wide receiver situation? Also, that defense. Is the secondary going to be the weak link for the Hawkeyes coming into the 2017 season? Let us know down below in the comment section.